Welcome to our next lecture on ESL teaching methodology update. Today we'll be talking about native and non-native teachers, but primarily we focus on teacher roles and different teaching styles. Before we start comparing native and non-native teachers of English, let's start from Chris. Have a look at the bubble and what Chris says about himself. I'm Chris and I'm 24. I was born in Scotland. I was working at a post office and then I was unemployed. I like travelling, so I covered a 40-hour course in Hastings for ESL teachers. Poland is a good choice for me. Not far from my home, delicious food, and the Polish girls are pretty. That was Chris' motivation to start working in Poland as a teacher of English, right? And now let's have a look at Anna. Anna is 38 and she says, I've been teaching English for the last 14 years. I graduated from Teachers Training College and University. I was many times in target language countries. I like my job, though it was not well paid at the very beginning. I love English and I self-develop all the time. Now, if you compare Chris's story and Anna's story, would you rather have a native or non-native teacher? Think about it. Think about some pros and cons of having native and non-native teacher in the classroom. So let's focus on advantages of having Chris as a native teacher of English in your classroom. They have instinctive feeling of what to correct grammatically, idioms, phrasal verbs, and so on. But definitely we may expect from Chris to know, this real language, right, full of phrasal verbs and idiomatic expressions. But if you think about grammar, would you say that you as a native speaker of Polish, you will be able actually to teach some non-native speaker of Polish your native language? I think that would be very, very difficult. Most of the time we use grammar of our native language, but we would be unable to explain the grammar rules to non-native speakers of our language. And number two, they have knowledge of the language. But this is what is claimed, especially by the majority of non-native speakers of the language, of teachers. Who knows the language better than native speaker? But would you say that a person who used to work in a supermarket in Great Britain or in a post office or who was a truck driver is actually able to, professionally pass the knowledge to the learners at different stages of their linguistic development? And number three, who is an ideal native teacher? From different questionnaires, it seems that native teacher is ideal when he's proficient in students L1. So if he knows Polish and at the same time he is a competent user of his native language, that is English, we really love such a native speaker. But of course, talking about native speakers, we should take into consideration different factors such as age and ask ourselves a question, is a native speaker a good teacher for the students of all the ages? And number two, what about level of proficiency? Is a native speaker good for the beginners at initial stages of our learning? Or maybe it's better to introduce a native speaker, a native teacher at a more proficient level. And now let's focus on non-native teachers. So let's focus on Anna. Anna is, as you remember, a very experienced teacher. She has a very good background. She graduated from college, from university, right? She has a passion for languages. Of course, there are some non-native teachers who actually, they experience this burnout after 20 or 30 years. But there are some arguments actually for having such a teacher in your classroom. Why? Number one, They serve as models of successful language learners. In other words, Anna may say to the students, well, look at me. I'm so passionate about foreign languages. I'm traveling to target language countries and I'm very, very successful. So, well, follow me. You may be actually as good as I am in the language. So definitely they serve as a model, as a kind of motivating factor for us as learners. Number 2, they can teach learning strategies more efficiently. How to learn vocabulary of a foreign language? Well, do you think that Chris would actually give you a piece of advice how to do it, how memorize vocabulary after attending a 40-hour course in Hastings? Of course, I don't want to say that all native speakers are not educated and are not professional teachers. Of course, that was the case in the past, especially at the beginning of the 90s, when there was a huge wave of not well qualified, let's say, native teachers from Great Britain, from the States, coming to Poland. And that was a way of making great career, right, abroad. But nowadays there are more and more professional native speakers. That's the fact. But if you ask the question to a native speaker, how do you learn this or that? Most of them would say, we don't know. Anna definitely would give you some precise information about what works good, what really worked perfectly well for her, and what really she wouldn't actually advise to implement. Number 3, non-native teachers can provide learners with more information about the language. All right? Language, it's not just communication. Most of the time we say, well, native speakers are excellent for communication. All right, but language is not just communication. We also need to introduce some boring grammar, especially tenses, right? To contrast Polish tenses with the English tenses. So who do it better than Anna? Now, they are able to anticipate the language problems. I actually discussed it before, contrasting grammar of the native language and the target language, and at the same time anticipating the problems that may appear. But this is something that we may expect from Anna, but that will be much, much more difficult to do it for Chris, unless Chris, I don't know, is married to a Polish girl, right? And he knows perfectly well our native language. They share the same language as the learners, which is useful when something is difficult to explain or understand. As we remember from our classes about grammar, there are some situations in which learners are allowed to use their native language in the classroom. For instance, for explaining grammar, the teacher may use Polish, right? And the learners may also ask the questions, sometimes very complicated, complex questions that they would never actually ask in the target language. And another argument for having not native teachers in a classroom is the fact that they are better for beginners. Of course, there are different approaches and philosophies about, what is good and what is bad for, especially for beginners. I think that saying just beginner, it's not enough. We need some more information about beginners because it's related to an age factor. If you think about kindergarten kids, probably it wouldn't be such a shock for kindergarten kids to have a native teacher, but that might be actually a shock for adult learners. So we have to be more specific about the term beginner. What age are beginners? What personality they represent? There are some actually students who actually they expect much from the teacher. They don't want the teacher to speak Polish, even to explain grammar in the native language. So definitely such students who are, who have very high self-esteem, that are extroverts, right, would prefer having native speakers in the classroom. And finally, an ideal non-native teacher is the one who represents near-native proficiency of the target language. I think that's obvious that if we have a 38-year-old Anna, we expect from Anna to be to represent the same level as Chris is. So we want her to have the competence and performance at a native-like level, especially phonology phonetics. And now let's focus on different roles that the teachers have to play in a classroom. But before we focus on these roles, let's have a look at some other roles that we play in our life. If you compare the role of you as a learner with the role of a teacher or a role of some celebrity, definitely you may find some similarities and differences. There are some roles in our lives that are somehow, we are fit for these roles, okay? So if you think about Brad Pitt, definitely he's fit for his role of being celebrity, for being, a famous actor, good actor. And the same is in the profession of a teacher. If we want to perform our role positively, right, we have to somehow be fit for this role. And our personality is somehow reflected in our role that we represent in a classroom. So right now, let's have these different roles that we may have in a classroom. What is a role? If you have a look at a definition, it's one's function of what a person is appointed or expected to do. We should make a distinction between a role and occupation. The main defining characteristic of a role is occupational aspect. So there is more to a role than doing a job, all right? So our occupation, our profession is this of a teacher, while within this occupation, within this profession, we may perform a number of different roles, depending on the context, on our learners, on the expectations and the needs of our learners. Let's start from a social role. And let's have a closer look at the main characteristics of the social role. The relationships and communications a person has with others, and the work done and job-related activities, beliefs and attitudes, and the use of uniform, sex, age, and any special abilities that further define the role. But definitely they do not necessarily affect our behavior. Well, basically there are three main groups of roles, and we try to have some insight into these three types of roles. The first one, these are task-related group of roles. Number two, interpersonal group of roles. And number three, roles reflecting institutional factors. Let's start from the first one. In order to understand a task-related group of roles, I prepared for you a task. I'm not going to give you any definitions because, that will be boring. I just prepared fill in the gap exercise for you. And you've got points from A up to I. And below, you've got some words marked in red that refer to different roles that may be fulfilled by a teacher in a classroom. And your task is to find a match, a particular role and its description. Take up some time, and when you're ready, you may have a look at the results that are in the next slide. In this slide, you've got the answers to the tasks that I assigned to you. And now let's focus on interpersonal group of roles. Within this group of roles, we have creative conditions, I think that's obvious that the teacher should somehow, facilitate the learning process by creating good conditions. And a friend or a partner, within this point, what we may say is that the teacher should somehow set some, some borderlines, okay? Being a friend and being a social agent or motivator, they should be somehow distinguished. And then the social agent, social psychologist, mental health worker, motivator and learner. I guess there is no need to discuss in detail other sub-roles because it's obvious. And finally, we have the roles reflecting institutional factors. And different teaching settings create particular roles for teachers based on institutional administrative structure, its culture and philosophy. Because these specific roles are quite difficult to understand, I will have some insight into all these roles. So the first one is needs analyst. Then we have curriculum developer, material developer, counselor, team member, researcher, and the last one is this over professional. So the question is, who is a need analyst? A teacher who determines students' individual needs following institutional procedures and uses the information obtained for course planning and development. Now, who is the curriculum developer? A teacher who develops his own course plans and syllabuses based on students' needs. Who is a material developer? This is a teacher who develops his own course plans and syllabuses based on students' needs. And the role of a teacher as a counselor. It is when the teacher identifies students who have problems and learning difficulties, offering individual counsel to those who need it. It is especially important nowadays when there are lots of learners who are experiencing, hyperactivity problems, ADHD problems, right? Dysgraphia problems. All these problems actually are related not just to a tutor, but they are also related to foreign language teachers. And the next role is this related to being a team member. Teachers are working in a school, be it a public or a private school, are not just working in isolation. They're a member of some, bigger family, in inverted commas, right? So they need to cooperate with other teachers, to take part in different activities like team teaching. There are some workshops that are organized also for teachers. And it happens frequently that one of the teachers who attended in some kind of, workshop may actually come back to his school or her school, and he or she shares experiences from the workshop with other team members. The next role of a teacher is this of a researcher. It is when the teacher conducts research related to language learning and teaching, including research in his own classroom. Of course, that at first glance it may seem so, theoretical, but it does not mean that you as a teacher, you need to, prepare some statistical calculations about the frequency of corrective feedback, negotiation of meaning, and so on, right? This role of a teacher is more related to your awareness that there are some changes in the classroom, that there are some modifications in the classroom that you may implement, and then that all these modifications somehow influence the learning and the teaching process. In other words, your role as a teacher as a researcher is related to your raising awareness of what really works with this particular student and what doesn't work, what innovations I can implement in this particular classroom. And the next role is this of a professional. Obviously enough, all ESL teachers should be professionals. It's not that we, after graduation from English Studies Department or Teachers Training College, we become teachers and we don't have to self-develop anymore. Teachers are expected to continue with their personal development by taking part in workshops and conferences, reading professional journals in the field, and joining professional organizations. As it comes to journals in the field, there are some good journals that actually are for foreign language teachers of all the languages. One of them is Języki obce w szkole. And as it comes to professional organizations, I guess that the most famous one is Association of Modern Languages, Polish Association of Modern Languages. There is also another role that comes to my mind that was not listed before. I call this role madness reducer. What I mean in this point is that we as teachers, ESL teachers, we have so many things to implement, to do in a classroom, that sometimes we are so, sick and tired of bringing up the children. I call it deliberately bringing up because what we may observe nowadays, this is a tendency of different kids, especially at the level of primary school education, who actually have some lapses in upbringing. So they swear in the class, they just, stand up and walk around the class. They have problems with hyperactivity. No wonder there are so many actually ESL teachers who experience, madness. But definitely, we as teachers, we should do anything that is at our power to reduce this madness. And now let's focus on the roles that are reflecting personal view of teaching. That means that these roles, they somehow reflect our personality. And the first one is related to this of a planner. Then we have a manager, quality controller, a group organizer, facilitator, motivator, empowerer, and finally a team member. Let's start from the role of a planner. Planning and structuring of learning activities are crucial for successful teaching and learning. Of course, we are not planners all the time. If we are more experienced teachers, when we are in-service teachers, we've been working for, 5, 10 or 15 years, it's easier for us to rely on our previous experience. But especially at the very beginning, when we are just, pre-service teachers or freshman teachers, we should devote much time to structuring the lesson and planning different activities in details. And now the role of a teacher related to management. It seems that nowadays, a teacher who is not a good manager will not survive in a classroom for the reasons that I mentioned before, right? If you are not a good manager in a classroom, you may be just sick and tired of teaching. Being a manager is related to organizing and managing classroom environment and students' behavior to maximize learning. So it's related to assigning particular tasks to particular students. You know what task should be assigned and when, and what kind of students may participate in particular tasks. And the next role is related to being a quality controller. It means that we as teachers, we should maintain the quality of language used in the classroom. We should provide our students with the corrective feedback, and this correct language should be reinforced and incorrect language should be discouraged. The next role of a group organizer means that we as teachers, we should develop an environment in which students work cooperatively on a group task. And the next role is related to facilitating the learning process. We as teachers, we should help students discover their own ways of learning and to work independently. That means that we should not force our students to follow some specific patterns of behavior. We should just signal some problems, and in this way we develop their autonomy. And the role of a teacher as motivator. Well, of course, there are no good ESL teachers if there are not good motivators. We know that in foreign language learning, motivation is of primary importance. We as teachers, we may improve students' confidence and interest in learning and building classroom climates that will motivate students. How can we do it? Of course, by providing our students with encouragement feedback. We may do it verbally or non-verbally. If we do it verbally, we do it in a form of, excellent, well done, be proud of yourself, you couldn't do better. But we may do it also in a non-verbal form, by smiling, right, by some specific body language, or by providing our students with some comments on the final test. And now the next role is this of an empowerer. A teacher takes as little control as possible. These are students who decide what they want to learn and how. Of course, we cannot implement this role in all the situations. In a normal public school, we are somehow limited by the curriculum, by the expectations of the parents, headmasters, and well, think about the situation that our learners actually do what they want to, they learn what they want to learn. Well, we may practice it, we may do it from time to time, but definitely on the regular basis we have to follow the curriculum. And finally, the last role to be discussed is this of a team member. Teachers and all the students constitute a team and should interact like members of a team. Of course, there should be some regulations that are related to the functioning of this team. It's a good idea to talk about these regulations at the very beginning. Well, usually it should take place at the first lesson. You may do it in the form of a poster if you are in a primary school, and you may work out some rules with your students. For instance, latecomers are not admitted to the classroom, or we speak exclusively English, no Polish in an English class, and so on and so on. So once again, the rules, the regulations about the functioning of the team should be worked out together. Of course, there are many other roles that you may come across in literature or methodology on foreign language learning and teaching. And the most influential authors are Hammer and Komorowska. As to Hammer, you may come across such roles as a controller, an organizer, an assessor, that is a very important role, a prompter, participant, a resource, a tutor, and an observer. Hanna Komorowska, in turn, in her book from 2001, she introduces very similar actually roles, and some of them have the same functions as these mentioned by Hammer, but she uses actually different terminology. So there is a role of an organizer, motivator, helper, that actually refers to the role of a facilitator, an expert, expert that might be actually an equivalent of a resource, a counselor, counselor that might be an equivalent of a tutor, a language model, judge, examiner, assessor, a listener, and finally an observer. I guess that you remember a very influential book by Larson and Freeman about principles of language learning and teaching. And when you've been discussing different methods and approaches of foreign language learning and teaching, there were some teaching roles that were discussed in all particular methods. And I guess you notice that a teaching role is somehow, it somehow reflects a particular method or an approach. Right now, we focus on these roles and how they function in different methods. Alright, so the first riddle for you is, what approach or method does teacher's role description come from? So this is the definition of a role, and your task is to guess what method or approach is related to this particular teaching role. A neutral observer, disinterested judge, supportive but emotionally uninvolved. Teacher, a teacher must teach, test, get out of the way, remain passive, and resist temptation to model or remodel, assist, direct, exhort. Yes, you are right. The answer is the silent way. And now another definition of a teaching role. In this method, a teacher must present the linguistic material in a way most likely to encourage positive reception and retention by the learner. A teacher should create situations in which the learner is most responsive. Do you know what method I'm talking about? Excellent. Yes, you're right. This is Statistopedia. And now the next riddle for you. In this method, a teacher is the source of comprehensible input in the target language. I guess that you remember that a term of comprehensible input was coined by Stephen Krashen. A teacher must create positive, low anxiety climate, must choose and orchestrate a rich mix of classroom activities involving group sizes, content, and contexts. Well, you couldn't do better. Of course, this is the natural approach. Alright, and the next riddle for you. In this method or approach, teacher is authority in the classroom. Yes, of course, this is the grammar translation method that nobody likes. And in this method or approach, a teacher is facilitator of the communication process, a kind of independent participant, an organizer of resources, a guide within the classroom, needs analyst, counselor, and group process manager. How did you know it is communicative approach? And now, a different role of a teacher. Central and active teacher who dominates the method, and in this method he provides the model, controls direction and pace, like the skillful conductor of an orchestra, a skillful manipulator. Of course, This is the audiolingual method. And once again, you are right. And now a teacher has an active and direct role. He's a kind of a director of a stage play with students as actors. Do you know what method or approach it is? Yes, you're right once again. This is the total physical response. Alright, now you know different divisions of roles, and at this stage I want to focus on various problems that might be associated with teachers' roles. I would actually categorize these problems under two headings. The first one is difficulties with defining and understanding the role. What I mean in this point is that there are some roles that we are expecting to assume, right, that are actually contrary to either our expectations or our learners or our learners' parents' expectations. So this is, I think, a great problem. Now, there is also a conflict of roles. What I mean under conflict of roles is that either there are mutually exclusive roles. So if you think about a role of an evaluator or an assessor, it's not in accordance with the role of helper, all right? Or organizer, and being at the same time attentive observer. There are also some roles that may overlap. For instance, the majority of teachers are teachers, and at the same time we play the role of, well, wives, mothers, and so on. And there are some roles that are against our nature. Definitely, each of us, we represent a different personality type. And if someone imposes a particular role on me or on you, we may say, well, it does not fit me, all right? It does not fit my personality. And now let's have a look at teaching styles. What is the relationship between teaching styles and teachers' roles? Teachers' roles, definitely they depend on teaching styles. Have a look at a quotation taken from Katz 1996. Teaching style encompasses teachers' beliefs, goals, interpretation of syllabi, and knowledge of content material. Why another quotation taken from Wright 1987. In this quotation, one may read, "A teacher's style is the collection of the many attitudes and behavior he or she employs to create the best possible conditions under which learning can take place." And now let's focus on teaching style. Definitely, teaching style is related to our personality. And if we compare two teachers, and we observe that they represent different teaching styles, we may assume that they represent totally different personality types. Teaching styles are influenced by teachers' beliefs and attitudes, which include cultural and social beliefs and attitudes about how to behave in social groups. Right? So if I was taught in the past that I'm not allowed to scream at anyone, I won't be screaming at my learners. Beliefs about the role of knowledge. There are some people who actually believe that knowledge transfer is priority in the teaching process. But there are also the teachers who actually claim that it's not as important as just facilitating the learning process of our learners. And our learners should actually be more autonomous and independent in finding the knowledge. So we as people, as teachers, we may have different approach and different idea of the role of knowledge. Then beliefs about the nature of learning. There are some people who actually believe that if I taught my students present perfect tense, 2 days later, everyone should know everything about this tense, when to use it, in what situation, and so on. But it actually it may be based on a false belief that whatever we teach must be remembered by students. But the real nature of learning is that we learn, but we also keep on forgetting things. Beliefs about the nature of knowledge, especially this related to language. So, what is important? Is grammar more important or communication? Right? For one teacher, learning grammar might be priority, while for others, communication may be more important. A very interesting research that I would like to cite was conducted by Barnes in 1976, and in his very extensive research, he was able to identify 2 basic types of teachers. Now I will focus on the first type of teacher and have a look at all these characteristics, all these teachers, and later on ask yourself the question whether you are more the first category of teacher or the second one. So, he described the first type of teacher as transmission teachers, who believe that there are distinctive disciplines such as science and foreign languages. They also believe that there are very distinct boundaries between disciplines. So they do not believe in any, interdisciplinary fields. But either you learn English or you learn mathematics, right? I guess that these actually teachers, they claim that if you are a humanistic mind, you will be better for languages. If you are, if you are more a science type, you will be better at mathematics. But definitely, it's a very clear-cut division, and saying something like this is it's a far-fetched statement. Number 3, the disciplines have content or things to learn. So we may expect from such teachers that they will say, I'm really sorry, but copula be, I am, you are, he, she, it is, you have to learn it by heart. These are just things that you have to learn by heart. Or past participle for present perfect tense. There is no other way of learning it but for memorizing. The next point, there are appropriate standards of performance in each discipline. In other words, they believe that everything in the language may be evaluated, and there are some norms, some standards against which we may measure somebody's performance. But I guess that you know that in different situations it's really difficult to evaluate somebody's performance, especially somebody's oral performance. Sometimes fluency is more important, sometimes accuracy is more important. The next point is learner's performance can be evaluated according to the standards laid down by the discipline. So let's say if somebody commits 5 grammar mistakes, well, such a person should fail on the final exam. Then teacher's main task is to evaluate and correct learner's performance. So there is no room for, autonomy of our students, but we as teachers should correct somebody's performance all the time. And finally, learners should find it difficult to gain access to the discipline because of the standards teachers laid down. So you say, I am here authority, I know everything the best. Look at me. It was so difficult for me to have an access to this knowledge. I'm not going to share this knowledge so easily with you. And what are the implications for such teaching styles and classroom management activities? Of course, we may expect from such transmission teachers that if they are believers that transmission of knowledge is priority, they wouldn't care so much about pair work or group work. would prefer, teacher-student interaction. Me as a teacher transferring knowledge to you. And now we have the other type of teachers who are called by Barnes interpretation teachers. Have a look at the main characteristics of these teachers. They believe that knowledge is the ability to organize thought, to interpret fact, and to act on them. So they don't care so much about, transmission of knowledge, all right? But they are more facilitators in organizing some new pieces of information to some cognitive schemata that our learners already have. Learners are intrinsically interested and naturally inclined to explore their worlds. So they really believe that learners are so open to, to foreign language. Teachers' main task is to set up dialogues in which learners reorganize their existing state of knowledge. So as you may notice, the teaching learning process is more about communication and not so much about grammar. And learners already know a great deal and also have the ability to extend and refashion that knowledge. So when we compare these two types of teachers, we may notice that interpretation teachers do not think about themselves as being, authority, all right? But they just take for granted that learners know quite a lot. And we as teachers, we may also actually learn something from our learners. And finally, I would like to mention management styles that appeared in Komorowska's book from 2001. These management styles are, of course, related to teaching styles. As Komorowska noticed, in the classroom, there might be 6 basic management styles. The first one is autocratic, then laissez-faire, paternalistic, consultative, participative, and democratic. I think that the very name suggests what a typical management style is about. Autocratic definitely means that you, as a teacher, you impose your way of thinking, right, on your learners. And you actually impose on your students what they should do in particular moment of a lesson. Laissez-faire comes from the French language, right? These are teachers who actually have no idea what is going on around them. They actually give authority to the learners and they allow the learners to decide about different activities. They ask students questions such as, would you like to sing the song for the 3rd time today? And then we have paternalistic teachers who are very similar actually to autocratic teachers, but the main difference is that they are just like our fathers. So whatever they do, even if they are so, they impose their style on us as learners, they do it because they like us, because they want us to learn something. So whatever they do it for students' sake. Then we have consultative. So in this consultative management style, there is lots of interaction between students and teacher. Students ask questions and a teacher, just like a doctor, gives different pieces of advice to students. Participative. There are some situations, especially in different project work activities, task-based activities, when teacher has to participate actively in different activities. So he behaves just like one of the students. Is it good or bad? Of course, it depends on the age of our learners, on their proficiency level. But definitely, when the teacher is an adult person and he or she teaches adult learners of English, well, I see no reason for not introducing participative management style and being just one of the learners. And finally, a democratic management style. I guess that you may guess that it's the best one. for a number of reasons. Because you are, as a teacher, a little bit of authority, a little bit of a partner, you also have some paternalistic features and participative and consultative management style. I would say that within democratic management style, we have the combination of actually different management styles. But the main feature of democratic management style is that whatever you do in a classroom, you consult it with your students. So if you want to decide about the deadline for some project or the date for the final multiple choice test, you ask your students for choosing the most convenient time for you and for them. So in other words, in democratic management style, the teachers recognize not their own needs, but also the needs and the problems of the learners. So thank you very much for your patience and for your attention.